all set. However you want to put that.
Awesome. And I'm rolling already?
Yeah, I just started recording it.
Yep.
I
Just gonna
already
switch
tested
this.
the mic to see. I don't know how to do it.
I did it that way.
But I already tested the mic, so it should already do it.
Okay.
And then I'll just edit out the.
Excellent. Will you just put that on that table and just let them sign in right there?
Yep, just right here.
We'll just hand it to them. They can sign in. There's only, those are the only three. That's okay. They might hear that anyway, so don't worry about that. I'm gonna wait until actually straight up 11 and we'll roll this. Right now, we're the only ones here. All right, what you got? Oh, Kansas City board? Okay. Okay. Yeah, you just, whenever, it's the KC board I'm not gonna know the answer to. I can explain what you need to do in ours. I signed you guys in last time.
Oh, thank you.
Didn't have a sheet for me last time. So on ours, it would be right here. So, I mean, you pop up automatically and then if.
You would just add me on that.
Correct.
And then I would ask Casey.
Are you part of their MLS as well? Okay, then there should be a way that you can essentially do this on your listing, on the listing side on Kansas City and just add him on the other side.
Pretty much
I would think so, yep. All the details that he's got, just copy them over to yours in the Kansas City board and then just put him as a co-lister on it. And that way you guys are represented on both ends that way. Okay, awesome. All right, we're right at 11. Oh, you didn't register? All right, looks like it may just be us today. I don't see anybody else online, so we will just roll with this. Once again, I'm in the, what am I looking for here? The Missouri Association of Realtors, their site where the forms are. And if you use this site, the nice thing is like today, it's showing us they've highlighted all of the forms that have actually changed. So if you didn't know what had changed, you can come through and you can actually see them that way. So, and we're going to cover a couple of those. The first one being, actually not real estate contract. We're going to do buyer's exclusive agency contract first, which will look very similar to what we did last week as far as the way it works. Get rid of the, so buyer's exclusive agency contract. Again, we're going to put the buyer's name here in the first line and Keller Williams will go right here because just as with the seller's agency contract, they are hiring the brokerage. And then the brokerage, we will designate you to be the agent to work with that particular client. If there's any property that's not represented here, so like if you had a land deal, you would come down here and you type land in this box, if that's what they're seeking, and then check this box. Most often you're gonna have residential box checked, but if it's something other than check this one and then fill it in this blank. This time period right here is exactly the same as we talked about on the seller's agency contract. When the buyer signs and dates right here, this becomes the effective date of this contract, and you are at that point employed by this buyer. So this time period is the date that this particular agreement expires. So an example, today we do this, what would that be, July? Oops, sorry, that's the day, 15th day of July 21, okay? We're going to do everything we can to try to secure you a property. And do you want us to tell people while you're looking? If you don't care, then we'll check does and we'll put something in this blank. If you would rather not divulge that information, just check does not, and we are not allowed to tell why you're out looking. Most often, this buyer is not going to be working with someone already. So you will check is not and move on down the road. Now, just like we talked about last week, if perhaps this client called you and said, hey, I'm not happy with the way Don's representing us, when our buyer's agency agreement expires, will you take over as my buyer's agent? So what you would do if that were the case, you would say sure, and you would go talk to the client. You would check is, and you would put the expiration date of my particular list or my particular buyer's agreement. So if we had, in this example, we're just going to say it's the end of January. Most often, again, guys, it's going to be is not, and this won't be a factor. But if somebody calls you and they need to call you, you can't cross the sign and call them. But if somebody calls you and says, hey, I want to work with you whenever my agreement expires, you can absolutely go talk to them and just check this is button and do this. And then you would come down here, same as with the sellers. Really, the only time that you're going to use number 9 is if they are under another agreement and you need to put the date that yours actually begins. Because same as we talked about before, if the buyer says, I'm not going to be ready to look until February, and they sign it today, and you make this the February 1st as far as their effective date is concerned, and I meet them on the 31st of January and get them under a buyer's agency agreement, I win. Because mine took effect before yours, okay? So you only want to use this if they're under an employment by somebody else, and most often you're not going to encounter that, and you're just going to check is not and move on down here. Yes? What is an example, something I put on 16? I would put, that would be like buyer is, first-time home buyer or second home or relocating, whatever that is, just whatever their reason is that they're looking to purchase a house. And again, it would only be if they say, sure, you can tell people while I'm looking. I don't care whether you do that or not. Compensation, if you were charging a flat fee of $150 or $250 to every client, then that's where that amount goes. And again, you can receive this either the date of this contract and you would have to hold on to that check until closing, or just get it at closing, which makes the most sense. Or if you're not doing one, then this would be 0 and you're going to check this not applicable box. All right, additional compensation, the nuts and bolts of what we're going to make, what we're going to get paid. Are we going to get a dollar amount or are we going to get a percentage amount? So perhaps you were making $5,000 this time, you would get 5,000, and I can't spell, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it wrong. And you would write the number 5,000 in that blank, if that were the case. Most often you guys are probably going to be working for a commission. And as per usual, like I said, if you attend my classes, you will hear me say this over and over again, not to price fix you, but I'm going to give you what you will normally see. You would do this, and then you have the 3 right there. Now, you're going to have buyers that are going to say, okay, wait, I thought that the seller was going to pay my commission. Well, then you take them right down here to this next line 33. Buyer understands that realtor will endeavor to collect part or all of this additional compensation to realtor from the selling or listing broker. So I'm going to do what I can to try to get this 3% in this example from the seller or the seller's agent. Now, if the seller's agent is only offering 2.5%, as you will find as time moves on soon, you guys are going to start seeing foreclosures come across. And odds are you will see different, you need to watch the commissions on those because most of the time they're 2.5% because the bank's only offering 5 to begin with. And then they're going to make that, whoever's listing it, they're going to have to send back a referral fee as well. But so if you've got an agreement with your client at 3% and the bank on that particular deal is only offering you 2.5%, you've got to do one of 2 things. Either your buyer has to make up that additional 0.5%, or you need to come back and amend this agreement because this agreement states you're supposed to get 3. And if we only show you got 2.5 and your file gets audited, they're going to red flag that. I mean, it's not a big deal, but to make your paperwork accurate, you need to come back and change that. But
Is there also?
there is, yeah, You can do, yes, I can't, now I'm not gonna think of the, yeah, now I'm not gonna think of the name of it, but yes, there is a, yeah, I'm not gonna get it. There is a form that you can do, and that one is normally utilized when I'm adjusting both my and your commission. That just because, and that is, I'll find that form in a minute, because that's the one anytime, that's, if it, whoever it's going to affect has to sign that document. So if it's just between me and my buyer, I can do that. If it's gonna affect the seller as far as what they're getting out of it, then the seller's gotta sign too. If it affects the seller's agent, all of us have gotta sign. So it's just a matter of who it affects. I will find that in a minute when we go back through forms.
Like, I've used that for all of them.
It still works, yeah. As long as everybody's on the same page that I'm only entitled to 2.5%.
I would just sign it.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, you did it correct. So we're going to do everything we can to try to get this money from somewhere else. Now, protection period, just as we talked about last week, this is only in effect as long as your buyer does not hire another agent. Once they hire another agent, your protection period goes away. But if this particular buyer goes and purchases a home, in my example, because I use 90, within the next 3 months that I have shown them during my buyer employment agreement with them, I'm entitled to commission because I was the reason that they went through that door in the first place. Now, if my agreement expires today and I had shown my clients houses this morning and they had one that they really liked and they hired you tomorrow, I'm not protected at all. So as terrible as that is, that's the way that works. So as long as they don't hire somebody, you are protected. And if they don't, then you're entitled to your commission that, as I said before, don't go opening a new bank account for all of the protection period money that you're going to be making. Non-performance of termination, if you are collecting this flat fee and the buyer flakes on you, you have a right to keep that flat fee. So again, that's up to you whether you collect it at the time of the contract, whether you collect one at all, or whether you do it at closing. But if you've got it in your possession and the buyer flakes, they've already agreed to the fact that you've got the right to keep it. When we enter into this contract, we are working solely for the buyer with the buyer's best interest at heart. With only, again, we are watching out for them, and that is our main focus. Now, if we happen to come across a property that we are going to list that meets our buyer's requirements perfectly, I would like you guys to have the ability to be a dual agent. So I want you to try to get yes on that. And again, as I explain this to my buyers and my sellers, I am not a dual agent until I am one. I am working solely for you until such time that a perfect listing comes across that's going to meet your needs. And then I go through the example of, just pretend there's a giant wall between the buyer and you. I cannot transfer information through that wall unless you give me permission to do so. So I would like to have the opportunity to be a dual agent if and when that time arises. So I'm going to get yes checked on both of these because I am a designated agent as well. And it even says here somewhere that you are not one until you are one. Buyer and seller, dual agent, yeah. Anyway, you're not one until that happens, but I would like you guys to have permission. And I always tell my clients, if something, the deal starts going bad and you don't want me working both sides of the tracks, I will gladly refer the other side out and continue to work in your best interest because you were here first. And that's the way I explain it. Transaction brokerage, you're not going to go back and convert to a transaction broker. Again, I don't think that it's possible for you guys to do it because that is truly a paperwork pusher and you can't advise, consult, direct anybody in any way if you are a transaction broker. All you can do is fill in the blanks. So it's going to be very difficult to convert back to a transaction broker after we've already been a buyer's full limited agent, helping them and guiding them and directing them. It's going to be hard to hold our tongues and go backwards. So I would encourage you guys to check no on both of those. If you've got a client that wants you to act as a transaction broker, call me and we'll talk through it because sometimes it does work. Sometimes it makes sense. You can go make, 1 or 2% for 30 minutes worth of work. And it's great. If we can figure out a way for you guys to do that, I'm all in. But most often it doesn't work. So just try to avoid it if at all possible. I like this section to go over with my buyers because it kind of says, hey, you have expectations of me, but I also have expectations of you. Number one, and first and foremost, is everything goes through me. You're going to work exclusively with me. You're not going to call any other agents. You're not going to call any other clients. You're not going to do anything without letting me know to avoid any confusion about whether or not I'm entitled to my commission. Okay? During this process, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for this house. If you're paying cash, that's great. We need to make sure we've got that information in place. If you're getting financed, there are going to be things that the lender's going to want from you. And we need to provide those in a timely fashion to make sure that we are able to have a full approved finance whenever we make our offer on this property. So make sure when you're asked for information that you supply it. Line 118 is by far my favorite line that has ever been written in a real estate contract in my 20-some years, because I want you to be available during my regular working hours, whatever the heck those are. So what I do here is really sit down with my client and say, okay, we need to discuss how you want to be communicated with and how often you want to be communicated with and under what platform. Do you want me to email you, text you, call you? You want me to do a combination of all three? Do you want to hear from me every day whether I know something or not? Do you only want to hear from me when I've got a great house from you? We need to set those expectations, because I can promise you from recent experience, if you don't set those up front and make it very clear, and I truly kind of write and take notes about what the client wants to, and I should have done this on my most recent one and I didn't, because they said, I just text me what's going on. And then they were upset because I wasn't calling them every day. Well, that expectation apparently was not correct when we said it. So make sure that you know how they want to be communicated with, because if they expect to hear from you every other day and you call them once a week, you're already behind the 8 ball. So just set that expectation with them. And 1 and 4 here are very similar to me. It's just another case of everything goes through me. Don't go look at houses without me. If you go to open houses, great. Let me know what you went to see, because I'd like to call that agent and find out more about that property, especially if you really liked it, okay? General conditions, equal opportunity. I'm going to show you every property that comes up. If you choose not to go see a property because of one of these protected classes, then you can go find somebody else to represent you. I cannot do that legally, and truthfully, nobody else can, and you really shouldn't be doing that either, because you can get a lawsuit against you. So we're going to look at all the properties. Notice of intended sale. I will do my best to make sure the seller has all of the receipts to the title company to make sure there is no liens on this property when you take it over. Obviously, that's why we get buyer's insurance, title insurance, in the event that something is missed or a lien comes up later. But I will do my best to make sure that the seller has all of their invoices to the title company so we can get those paid off at closing so you don't have any liens on the property. Legal and professional advice. I am a realtor by trade. I am not a tax, finance, structure, survey, hazmat, engineer, or any of these other things. If any of those issues come up and we need to find those people and you don't have those people already in your group of contacts, I will help you locate those people, but I'm not going to answer those kinds of questions for you. So if you have tax questions, we're going to send those to a tax person. If you want to know about a survey, I can look at the survey and tell you what I think, but if we need to know something specific, we're going to call the survey company, okay? Default and remedies. We are going to get along great through this entire process. You will always be perfect. I will always get along with you, but in the event we don't get along and I've got to come after you for my commission, you're also going to pay my attorney fees, okay? Other provisions. This is much like I talked about last week, guys. I never like to use my clients' words against them unless they're getting up in my kitchen about something. Specifically, why haven't you shown us properties? The market's hot. Why haven't you shown us something? Well, because you told me you only wanted to look at houses in cul-de-sacs. You only wanted to look at houses without covenants and restrictions. And that's a big one. People will say, I don't want to live somewhere where there's covenants. And then you'll get a phone call. Why didn't you tell me about this house over on Maple Avenue? It's perfect because they've got covenants. So I didn't send it to you. It is perfect. It's exactly what you guys are looking for, but it's got covenants. And you specifically stated to me that you would not live somewhere that had covenants because you weren't going to be told where you could put your basketball goal or how tall your fence could be. So that's why I didn't send it to you. So this is that area that any specifics that the buyer, really is hammering on, I like to take notes of those in the buyer's agreement. Now, you guys are obviously going to do a consultation with them to get their needs analysis and know what they are looking for. But if there are specific things that you think might ultimately hinder your ability to find them a house, take a note of it. Because if it does hinder you and they come at you, you can say, well, this is the reason why, because you put this restriction upon me. Okay? Of course. It's one of those, I would have to see the covenants because some of them specifically stipulate that they have to meet once a year, that they've got to do certain things. So it would be how the actual structure of the CCR is set up about whether or not they could even enforce those items. Yeah, and that's the thing.
That one guy that
Well, truly, I would ask for a copy of the covenants because I would guess in the first 2 pages, it's going to say the requirements of what this board has to do. And then the next 25 pages are going to be all the things that they're restricting.
So I just need to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you need me to look at it, let me know. Yeah. Okay. Minimum brokerage services, these are the things the statute says you guys are going to do. Obviously, we're going to do more than accept and deliver offers, assist you in developing and communicating those offers, and answering questions about your offers. We're going to do a whole lot more than that, but this is what the statute stipulates that we are required to do. Thanks to the wonderful thing that I love so much, the Missouri Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, we can sign this document from anywhere. This document's only valid in the state of Missouri, so you can't go buy a property in Kansas with this document or employ someone to buy in Kansas in this particular case. But it's only good in the state of Missouri, but you can be in Washington, D.C., they can be in California, you both can sign it, and it's still valid. Franchise disclosure, we are a franchise, so you're going to check this box. So if the buyer gets mad at you, they can only sue this office. They cannot sue the entire franchise. Effective date, as I said, most often this is going to be blank because you're going to have your buyer's signature, and as soon as the date that they sign it, becomes your effective date. Keller Williams goes here, your name, or excuse me, your signature, your name, and the date will obviously be with your signature. I don't care about your email. I don't care about your address. I certainly don't care what you call yourself. Same thing with the buyer over here. Now on the seller document, it was important that we had their email. I still like to capture it here because then I know where it is. I can always go back to this document and reference that as well as their address, okay? Just in the event that I ever need that, I know where I can go find it. So I do try to get those things on there. Designated agency, this client has hired Keller Williams, and then the brokers of Keller Williams are going to designate you guys to be the agents to work with this client. So anybody that's going to be talking to this client needs to be written in these boxes here, and then Jim or I need to sign it here. And I just talked to Nicole moments ago before you guys got here about what we need to do to get these fields populated with like our signature, so you don't have to come tracking Jim or I down to get our signature on this. I'm going to try to have it already populated in DocuSign, so when you pull up the document, all you've got to do is fill in the date, okay? Of course, Kelly. What?
So, I have a client that then upload it to DocuSign. How do you sign?
Absolutely. Yep. Or call me and I'll come sign the paper. Either way. But yeah, if you have somebody that I shouldn't say refuses, but that doesn't want to do it. Yeah, that either doesn't know how, doesn't have the technology, or doesn't want to sign electronically, yeah, just go get everything signed by hand and upload it. It's just, this is obviously much faster. The last 2 pages are just like the listing agreement. On the seller side, it just tells about what I'm going to do as a buyer's limited agent. Here are my dual agent duties, and again, I usually bring them down here to explain that dual agency to them, that I can't do these particular things. And then the last page is all transaction broker, about what you can and can't do. So, questions about the employment side of things? It is fine. Here's what I normally do with my clients is, will you do me a favor and take 30 minutes and read through this? It's going to bore you to tears, but will you at least read through it? Because that way, if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, we can talk specifically about that. But yeah, and that's a really great point. With the technology, it's easy for us just to ship something over here, get signatures, and have it back. But if the buyer or the seller doesn't know what they're signing and what the repercussions of that can be, that's when we have problems later on down the road. So I normally just send it to them and say, hey, I sent you the documents. All you have to do is sign it, but take 30 minutes to just kind of at least scroll through it and see if there's anything that catches your eye that you don't understand. Okay? And we're past that already. So now we're going to hopefully write a real estate contract. And I've got to look at my red line version because they've changed some things since the last time. So I don't know if you guys have seen a contract before or not, but they have a new one that is just out, and this is and it's updated in DocuSign. So if you pull it out of DocuSign, it is the current one. But just know, and I'll cover the couple of changes, that there are some differences in what used to be here. Buyer's name goes here as far as we're making an offer. Now you're going to have some sellers or some buyers that are going to say, well, there's no seller's name on there. And I'm not making an offer without a seller's name on there. Well, you can come all the way back down here to the bottom. If they're hard, fast, and set on having a seller's name on it, you can bring them back here to the end and you can print the seller's name right here. Now, I encourage you not to do that because it might be listed as the owner, Don Klepper, but the property might actually be in Don Klepper Trust. So now the seller's name is actually wrong. We got to come back and change it. Because when I make an offer, this buyer is making an offer on this particular property address. And the only entity that can convey that is the person or persons that actually own that particular property. So I'm making an offer on a property and whoever owns it has to respond to me. It's just so, therefore we don't have to have the seller there. If the property is located within the city limits of any city, Republic, whatever, Springfield, Nixa, Ozark, that needs to go in this blank here. If it's out in the country and outside the city limits, you can leave this blank, okay? Street address, city, zip, and county. Legal description, just as it was on our seller's employment agreement, I want you to just leave this blank because it defaults to the seller's vesting deed, which means it defaults to the title company, which is where I'd rather have that liability if the legal description turns out to be wrong, okay? If you do choose to do it, you can check this box, and like if you printed out the CRS tax record, at the top of it, I want you to write legal description and then have everybody sign it so we know why that particular document's attached. But in the long run, I would encourage you just not to even attach it at all. All of these things here that are now in teeny tiny letters are the things that the buyer should expect to be coming with the property. Now, the couple things that you need to watch for specifically are propane tanks, and it doesn't say, I don't know if they talk about this or not, and solar systems, water softeners, and alarm systems. We need to make sure those items are actually owned by the seller. Because if they're leasing that propane tank or leasing that water softener, it doesn't actually convey with the property. Now, your buyer can likely make an agreement with that company and leave it in place, but it doesn't convey with the property. Solar systems, make sure it's actually paid for. Because you know what? Those $0 down deals are great, and I love that people are putting solar panels on their house. But they're financing them out 30 years, and hey, guess what? They're probably going to sell their property before that, and guess who's going to want to be paid at the day of closing? So if your seller is selling, and I'm kind of switching my hat here, but if they need $80,000 out of their house, and you're selling it for $100 after you pay commissions, then, oh, wait, the solar company has to have their $30,000, then all of a sudden your seller's upside down. So make sure those things are paid for, and again, make sure that those items are actually owned by the seller that they're conveying. And if something is not going to be included or excluded, then it needs to be noted. So if I know I want the tractor in the garage and I want the big screen TV and the refrigerator, I can put all those items right here on my included line. Now, if you are putting stuff after whatever stuff it is, I encourage you to write of no value, because lenders hate stuff. Lenders want to finance a house. They don't want to finance a house and a tractor and a TV. So I always put of no value on there because then they take that essentially out of consideration. You will have some lenders that will just flat come say, I need that removed from the contract. And you'll have to do a contract amendment stating, you know, property being sold at whatever, not to include tractor, and then your buyer and your seller will make a side agreement on their own to get that. But I put it in the contract because if it's not, and I need to go back and show you guys this very specifically in bold, this contract and not a seller's disclosure statement, MLS, or other promotional material provides for what's included in the sale. If it's not in the four corners of this particular contract, these 8 and 9 pages, it doesn't exist. So just because it says on the MLS that the tractor and the refrigerator and the TV are going with the property, it's not in here, it doesn't exist. So you need to write it in the contract. And just attaching the MLS is not sufficient, as per the attorneys. I think it should be, but the attorneys say that it's not, and for good reason, because I can attach an MLS from today. You can go alter that at 11 today, and you can present me an exact, completely different one from today than I gave you. So you need to put it in the four corners of the contract if you want it in there. Exclusions, same thing. If there is a place set in the backyard that you don't want, write it in there. Your buyer should expect that the house will be free of debris and personal property as of the time of closing. So you don't necessarily need to put the trash or whatever, but if the storage shed is full of stuff, you should probably make a note, storage shed to be cleaned out. Now, they should do that anyway, but I like to be really specific. I don't ever like there to be a question about what my buyer expects, because it only gets us in trouble, okay? So don't be afraid to write things there as far as inclusions and exclusions. And when you get a contract, make sure you're paying attention to those lines. Because I can tell you what, I've had a couple of agents that have had to buy refrigerators because they missed it on line 18. And their seller took the fridge with them. So just make sure that you know what's going on there. Next three lines, pretty self-explanatory. Purchase price, how much are we offering for this property? We'll just go $100,000 for our example. Now, sellers' concessions. Well, what are sellers' concessions? Well, you'll note that they've done a really nice thing right here, and they said that you could see section 10. Well, let's just go look at section 10. What do you say? This is everything that's included in closing costs and what you should see on the settlement statement. Items from 258 to 270 are what the buyer is expected to pay for. So if the buyer is asking for $2,500 of concessions on page 1, that $2,500 first goes here to pay off whatever is here. So let's assume in this example that this costs $1,500 to do all of these items. So there's $1,000 left over. Then it comes down to the items that we would prorate with that particular seller. So if we sold it on June 30th, buyer's going to pay for 6 months of taxes, seller's going to pay for 6 months of taxes. So if we've got leftovers, then the seller would prepay that for us. So if this cost $500 and we've still got $500 left over, that goes back to the seller. Your buyer doesn't get that. But if your buyer's wondering, well, what are seller concessions? These are the things that they are going to be expected to pay for at the time of closing. So if you don't think you're going to have money to pay for these items, roughly $2,000 to $2,500, then we may need to talk to see if the seller can help you out with that. Now, the items from 271 to 279 are items that the seller is paying for themselves already. So the seller concessions on page 1 does not include these items here because that is the seller's expense outside of our buyer. Does that make sense? These up here are the items that our buyer is going to be expected to pay. These are the items the seller is expected to pay. And these are the items that they would split 50-50 or whatever the time period of the year is. So the seller is going to be paying these items anyway. If we ask for concessions, then we're covering the buyer's expenses up there. Oh, earnest money, earnest money, earnest money. We don't have an escrow account at the office because earnest money is a scary thing. And they love to audit your files and make sure that the money's all where it's supposed to be. So because of liability, we don't have one here. My opinion on earnest money, and I tell my clients, is we're not going to offer it unless they ask for it, with a caveat. Because if it means something to the seller and the seller wants it, we're absolutely going to give it to them. But I would rather you not put your $500 or $1,000 out there if we don't have to. Now, that being said, in today's climate, when you know that there's going to be 7 other showings the same day that you're showing the property, and you know there's going to be 4 other offers in addition to the offer that you're going to send, I encourage my clients to offer earnest money. Because if I've got $200,000 offers in my hand, and one of them I've got $500 of earnest money and all the other terms are the same, I'm going with this one. Just because it's a little extra insurance for my seller in case something does go wrong. Give me just a second because I need to look through this. They've changed a couple things here. Yeah, they've removed some language, which is good. So if you do receive your check, it's to be delivered to X, whoever is going to hold it. I would just tell you to go to whatever title company that you're going to close and have them hold it. And they've got it within 5 days of the effective date. So this is something you need to pay attention to because you've been around for a while, is we've been used to 10 days to get the check deposited. Now we got 5. No, you will get that back. But yeah, you've got to put that in there. Now, the paragraphs that we'll get to in a minute, 5, 6, and 7, don't begin until your contingency is lifted. But yeah, your money's got to be there if you've offered earnest money. Yeah, what do you got?
If they do take it after.
It is, but if there was an issue,
Then they could be,
then
yeah, I get, okay.
this is a protection for the seller
Right.
because the reason they shortened the time period is because buyers were hedging their bets, they would try to get their inspector in there really quick in the first 10 days. And if the inspection didn't go well, then they never offered that earnest money. Because that way, when they tried to get out of the contract, they didn't have to go get it back. So they've shortened the time period to say, if you're serious about giving us earnest money, get it to where it needs to go. Okay? So, and you can change that time period here. So if you want to make it 10 days, you can change the time period because it's given you the ability to do that, but it defaults to 5 days. Kelly, got a question? Okay. If earnest money is not delivered, here's the answer, somewhat of the answer to your question, and this is new verbiage they put in. If earnest money is not timely delivered to the escrow company, then the seller may terminate this contract providing proofs thereof or whatever. So until that earnest money hits the escrow company, the seller can terminate the contract at any point. So that is a motivator to have your buyer get that check written and get it in as quick as possible, okay? And again, I don't particularly like earnest money because when there's a problem, both sides want the money. And it just sits there and we fight about it. So again, my advice is don't offer it unless they ask for it, unless you know you're gonna have competition. Yep, that's, well, yeah, I think they did remove that, didn't they? And also note here, guys, this is new that they put in here too. If it's to be treated as non-refundable, then there's a special rider that you can do that for. You know, I've had some recently where like, you know, the seller's demanding a non-refundable earnest in order to extend the contract or whatever. So if you have that, then you need to use that other rider because this earnest money here, and I'll show you later in the contract, is just about dispute. If you got it non-refundable, then you can't dispute it, obviously. And forgive me while I'm reading through this just to make sure I don't miss something in this new stuff. All right, where are we going to close the property? Odds are it's probably going to be the same place that you've got your money kept. So whatever the closing company is, and I like this. So if it's, you know, Hogan on Sunshine, you can put on Sunshine. What day and month do you want to close? Obviously in the year. Possession of keys will be delivered to buyer at closing. We are not responsible for keys. Buyers should change the locks. And I have a really strong conversation with my buyers whenever they purchase a property. Because just because I've been given a Ziploc bag of door openers and keys doesn't mean that's all of them. We don't know if the babysitter still has a key. We don't know if the gardener might still have a key. We don't know if crazy cousin Eddie might still have a key. So get your locks changed. And to me, a great closing gift is to call Mike, the rekey guy, and have their house rekeyed for them. Yep. So anyway, make sure that they're at least having that conversation with them to change those locks. Try to close at closing, guys. If you're gonna have to do a possession prior or possession after, I'd like to talk about it because it never ends up well. When I say never, I'm not exaggerating. Almost never ends up well. So try to have the people moved out and the new people move in on the day of closing. If there is a tenant, you've got a tenant rider that you've got to attach. And like I said earlier, that the buyer should expect other than ordinary wear and tear, it should be in the same condition as when they viewed it and free of any debris and personal property. Appraisal and financing. If your client is getting a loan, please check this box. That box is the only way that you can make this contract contingent upon the property actually appraising at the right amount. And let me tell you, this is a really important box right now because I get a call almost every day about, hey, we didn't appraise. What do we do? And that's happening a lot just because the appraisers aren't keeping up with the values. Now, by default, you've got 25 days to get that appraisal in. I want you guys to make that whatever your closing time period is. So if you're 45 days to closing, make it 45 days. And the reason I say that is, A, it's a good protector for you, but let's assume the appraiser goes out there and says, hey, the house is not going to appraise until the roof is repaired. Once the roof is repaired, I will be glad to go out and reappraise it, and I'm certain that it'll meet the numbers. Okay, so in the inspection notice, we have agreed to the seller's going to fix the roof. They're coming out in 2 weeks, which would not be the case right now. And then the appraiser is going to go back and reappraise it. Well, let's assume that the roof gets finished on the 26th day after our contract is written. The appraiser goes out and it still doesn't appraise. If we haven't changed this time period, then our buyer is hosed. because just because it didn't appraise, they no longer have that as a contingency to get out of the contract. Let that set in. If this time period passes, your buyer can't get out because of appraisal. So if you have an offer at 110 and the house appraises at 100, your client's gonna have to come up with that other 10 grand by contract. Now, they may not be able to, and the contract may ultimately default, but that's what the contract states, is after that time period, you can't use that appraisal as an excuse any longer. And if there is a discrepancy, so let's assume that we get that $100,000 appraisal on that 110 offer, then we can come down here and utilize this form right here, MSC 2020 appraisal notice, to say that there's an issue. You've got 5 days to get on the same page, and I think that's plenty. And if you need more than that, everybody's going to agree to it. If you're actually working towards a resolution, you're going to be fine. But if you're going to butt heads and we're not going to get on the same page within 5 days, it's not going to happen. So I think that's fine to leave it that way. And again, they've got, and I will pull up this appraisal notice for you here in just a minute so you guys can see the 3 sections that they've got on that. All right, not contingent upon financing, which means they're going to pay cash for it or whatever. This does not mean that your client cannot get financing. This means that the lender can't say, well, we can't close because we can't finance this for X. This says the buyer's going to buy the property, show up and buy the property no matter what. However they get the money, it doesn't matter. They can have it stuffed in their mattress, they can have it wired in from wherever, or they can go get a loan for that amount. But they cannot leave the contract because they couldn't get a loan, okay? Non-conventional would be your government loan riders, your USDA, FHA, and I will show you that one as well in a minute. Much of the language contained in that rider will look very similar to this next paragraph for a conventional loan. So if we're doing a conventional loan, same thing here. I want you to extend this time period out to your closing. Because if you haven't experienced lenders yet, you will, and you will discover that 25 days is going to be really hard to get done. Because it states even down here at the bottom on line 81, if the loan contingency deadline passes, which is this time period right here at line 70, without termination, buyer remains obligated under this contract and must have available funds required to close. So if this time period passes, just like the appraisal time period up here, you no longer have this as an excuse to get out of the contract. Right. I would do a contract amendment that states appraisal period extended to X, closing extended to Y.
Right, but I mean,
There,
they got it.
yeah, and that's the thing, and it's frustrating. You should absolutely be frustrated by it, but I try to give them as much credit as I can. They're backlogged, they're swamped, just like, all the properties that we've been selling, they've all had to appraise them. And the appraisal pool has gotten smaller over the years because a lot of them got tired of listening to us be mad at them. So there's not as many of them out there, and they got to kind of pick and choose. And, but yeah, when it doesn't appraise, the best thing I can tell you to do is send comps, but you're just waiting on a response.
Yeah,
And
this was like, we don't even know.
yeah, and that would be when I truly try to have my buyers step up and say, you need to get on your lender. You need to be calling them every day and figuring out what's going on, because they're not going to talk to me. I'm just going to make them mad, but they're making a lot of money off of you, and they should perform for you. So don't be afraid to call them and find out when this appraisal is going to be done.
Like,
Right.
this makes no sense to me.
Not helping, doesn't help my clients.
Wheels backed up on it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, and I wish I had a better answer for that, other than, you can just keep calling, but the more we call, they feel pestered. That's pretty much true. No repercussions for them whatsoever. Yep, which is sad, but it's also true. I think you're exactly right.
And I have a question on this. Selling new construction.
Uh-huh.
There's not a new construction. Complete is when they can.
Right. Well, and so you guys do not have a builder contract that you're using as far as punch lists and those kinds of things? Because this, and the reason I say that is it states very specifically in this contract, unless they've taken it out, which I don't think they have. This contract is designed for use in connection with completed construction. If used for new construction, an appropriate rider addressing things such as approval fire plans. So are you attaching things as far as timeframes are concerned?
Well, I mean, not as far as.
Because the way I've always encouraged people to utilize this contract is if it's out of the ground and maybe you got to pick carpet or paint or maybe countertops and appliances, but I don't want you having to do a punch list through this contract because it's not built for it.
Right. There is something you're telling me?
No, there's not. That's what I'm saying, is normally I would tell you to have something designed for your particular builds. So you can say, here's our contract that we're going to attach to the regular real estate
Okay.
contract that covers our time periods.
Okay, so I do have, like, we do have.
Yes.
So
Yeah, because this is not designed to deal with,
they still have to sign that.
they still have to sign this, but it's not designed to deal with, plan changes and we want the bedroom facing this way versus that way. This can't handle that, whereas your paperwork can.
Okay.
So just attach yours to this contract. And then you've got the ability to move within yours with those details while still holding the actual sale together with this side with the contract.
Okay, and sorry,
Nope, you're fine,
but, so.
right?
I really just created it,
Okay.
and that's fine.
As long as everybody agrees to it, you can write a contract on a napkin.
Okay.
I don't care.
I sometimes feel a little odd.
And if you want me to look at it, I'm happy to do that too.
Okay.
But yeah, if I write down my property address and a sales price and I sign it and you sign it, that can be held up in law or in court. Now, it doesn't deal with all the other stuff going on in our contract, but essentially you can write a contract on a napkin. So again, it's not really designed for that new construction, but you still need to utilize the contract to make it work as far as the sale goes. Yep. All right, so a conventional loan, we're going to do all of our things in the financing time period, but again, make sure we extend this through. I believe compliance has finally gotten past this. I personally don't think it's anybody's business what kind of rate or term or anything that my client is getting. So I personally put all terms to be determined by lender. Have you?
Apparently they're working on that.
Yeah, and if they do kick it back, what I would tell you is just broad brushstrokes in this. This doesn't have to be precise because, again, I don't think it's anybody's business what my buyer's doing. And I really don't like this section being in here for that reason, because essentially I'm showing the seller, hey, here's what my buyer's gonna do. What do you think? Yep. Yeah, so I would do this regardless down here at the bottom, because that way if something does change, we can put it on the lender and not on us, that, hey, the lender said we had to change this because of whatever, okay? Title and survey. Typically, seller does a title search and sends that to the buyer that it's all clean, and then the buyer pays for title insurance in case something is missed. That's what I call the standard way of going about it. This contract allows for 4 different ways for that to happen. Within 10 days of the effective date, it says title's going to be delivered. I think 10 days is plenty. Title companies have been pretty on the ball. Make sure you get your paperwork to them immediately. But they've been pretty good about turning those things over. A says that the seller is going to do both of those. They're going to pay for the title search and they're going to pay for the title insurance. Now, this might be a situation where I've got a first-time home buyer that doesn't have any ready cash. They've got great credit, but they don't have, and all of their cash is going for their down payment. They're not going to have anything else left over. Okay, so I might make a very strong offer on this $100,000 house. I might offer, I've already asked for $2,500 in closing costs on page 1. I'm going to ask for a home warranty in a little bit, so now I'm at $3,000. But I'm going to go ahead and ask the seller to pay for both sides of it. So I might make my offer a little bit sweeter, make sure those things are covered, because I've got myself covered with the appraisal. If it doesn't appraise, we can still go back and fix that. But I would see this as a case where the buyer just didn't have any money and they're asking the seller to do it. I've not seen this one actually utilized ever, to be honest with you, but that's the example that I see of that one. B says we're gonna split it 50-50, which sounds great on paper, but it's gonna be very rare that your title search and your title insurance are gonna be the same amount. So somebody's coming out ahead and somebody's coming out behind. C is just what I described as the quote typical way to do it. Seller does the search, buyer does the insurance. And that's what you will typically see getting on contracts. And truthfully, that's most often probably what you're going to send. Now, if you had an investor that wanted to make an $80,000 offer on that $100,000 house, and obviously not asking for closing costs, for paying cash, we're gonna close in 10 days. And oh, by the way, I'm gonna check D, I'm gonna pay for the title search and the title commitment. So to me, that's a great thing for your investors to do is because it's not going to be a whole lot of extra money for them, but it's a nice olive branch to put out there to the seller saying, we know we're giving you an offer that's less than you want, but we're going to take away some of your expenses. Okay. So again, C is what you're going to run with most often. So just plan on using that one. But if you may run into situations where you need to use this other one as well. Who's going to issue the title commitment? Probably the same people that we've put here on these two blanks on page 1. But it all defaults to this line right here as to who's going to do the actual closing. So this is the title company. Buyer's got 20 days by default to review this title commitment. To me, for the title commitment, that's plenty. Once you guys get used to this, you're going to be able to review a title commitment in about 30 minutes from stem to stern. So 20 days is plenty. Now, if your client is getting a survey, carry this time period through to closing. Because this 20 days is 20 days to review the title commitment and any other documentation about the property. Okay? Let me see specifically what it says here. Title commitment including use and other restrictions, rights of ways and easements, and all the recorded documents the buyer may desire to obtain. Also, a survey. So they've got to not only get the document and review it in that time period, but if they're doing a survey, that has to happen in that same time period, and you're not going to get that done in 20 days. So extend that through to your closing because that gives you time to review those documents. Hopefully it won't be an issue, but I like to extend it through just to make sure I'm covered. Because again, if I get a survey that comes back that my buyer doesn't like, and I've left this at 20 days and it's the 21st day, they can't use that as an excuse to leave the contract, okay? Most often you're just gonna leave that blank though, because 20 days is plenty. This 20 days down here only refers to D. It says that the buyer's gonna get it for themselves and they're gonna have 20 days to review it once they get it themselves. A, B, and C say that the seller's gonna deliver it to the buyer and then the buyer's got that time period to do it. D says the buyer's essentially gonna deliver it to themselves and they've got that time period to do it. So if there are any objections on that surveys or on that title, so we get a title commitment back and it has a $500 lien from the city for mowing the ditch. So buyer says, I don't want to be saddled with that $500 lien, so I put on this form MSC 2055N, title and survey notice that says this needs to be fixed before closing. Okay. The seller's then got 7 days to respond to us. I think you don't need to change that time period. I think it's fine because they are either going to do it or they're not going to do it. And the example that I use here with the $500 lien because they mowed the front ditch is a seller that says, I told them not to do that. I was going to mow it the next day. They came and knocked on my door. I told them I'm doing it tomorrow. And they came that afternoon and mowed it and gave me a $500 lien. I am not paying that $500. I don't care. I don't care if the house sits here and rots. I'm not paying that $500. So if that's the case, then the deal dies within that 7 days. If the seller won't agree to fix it, after that 7 days, the deal dies. Now, if you will look at line 106, if seller does not so agree, then this contract will automatically terminate unless buyer within 3 by default additional days agrees in writing to take the title without the correction. So follow along with me here if you can. We've got a contract. We have sent our paperwork to the title company. We have got our title commitment back to our buyer. Our buyer has seen the $500 lien on the property and has sent the notice to the seller. The seller has refused to fix that, so the contract dies. Now my buyer has 3 days from the time that contract dies to say, you know what? We'll pay for the $500 because we want the house that badly, and come right back in and the contract starts right back over, okay? I think 3 days is plenty. Hopefully you don't get to that point, but it does allow your a buyer an opportunity that if they, because at line 108, if the seller doesn't respond, then they're deemed to say that they're not going to fix anything. So if we don't hear from the seller in 7 days, then the buyer's got the right to say, well, you know what, we'll go ahead and take it without that title work being fixed. And then we've got the legal ease about we're going to clear those things out and what kind of purchase price, et cetera. All right. Section 7. This is probably where we'll have the most conversations over your career. Inspections. Property is being sold in its present condition with no warranties expressed or implied unless we've got one in writing. Buyers, conditions of the property that are disclosed or clearly visible should be considered by buyer in setting the purchase price. They should also be noted in your contract. So, if when walking through the house, the windows in the front living room, the seal has broken on all three of them and they're all fogged up on the inside, and your buyer wants that fixed, put it in your offer. You don't wait for the inspector to do that. Now, I don't expect you to go open every door, turn on every faucet, all of that stuff. But if you can see it readily with your own eyes and your buyer's going to want it fixed, it needs to be in the four corners of this contract. Okay? Because we can't rely on the inspector putting those things in his report, because we cannot ask for anything on the inspection notice that's not in an inspections report. Okay? So if they didn't put those windows in their inspection report for whatever reason, we can't go back and ask for them later. So we want to make sure we ask for those things up front. Seller agrees to permit inspections of the property by any qualified inspector or appraiser. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's tough to say because we don't actually have any licensure for inspectors in the state of Missouri. So truthfully, your buyer could go do their own inspection. Now, they're still going to have to provide me with the written report and photos, but they have the right to do that. The attorneys tell us that the way to look at this is if Cousin Eddie is a contractor by trade, then it makes perfect sense for Cousin Eddie to go, inspect your property. If Cousin Eddie is an accountant by trade, that's a little more questionable. Now, I can't refuse that. If he provides me with a written report and photos, I can't say he's not qualified to do that inspection. I don't know if he is or not. Maybe he is. Maybe he's a, handyman on the side. But typically, you're going to use somebody that is a inspector by trade, is the way I like to say it. Trying to feel like I missed something up here. Something that you guys need to note that came up here recently. Buyer agrees to immediately repair any damage to the property and hold the seller harmless of anything that comes out of the inspection. So recently, the buyers were doing an inspection on a property and the inspector punched a hole in the bottom of the septic tank. Guess who's responsible for that? Not the seller. So, well, we're still dealing with that right now, but just make note of that your buyer's going to be responsible if anything happens. Normally nothing happens, but just be aware of that. All right, Section B. This should actually be called get out of jail free. What this states is within 5 days from the date of the contract, if it's blank, it's 5 days by default, that the buyer may review additional data regarding the property. Here's these magic words, including but not limited to zoning, subdivision, covenants, restrictions, associations, rules, regulations, financial information, taxes, school district, lane improvements, presence, sex offenders, criminals, et cetera, et cetera. They can leave for any reason. The example I use in this is I've got a client in California, and they are coming in tomorrow, and they want to make this offer on this house today. So I have gone to the property, and I have FaceTimed them throughout this entire property. They've seen everything. They love it. They want to make an offer. I write an offer. I send it to them. They sign it. We make the offer. We're accepted with this property data being blank for 5 days. They come in tomorrow. I pick them up at the airport. We drive up to the house, and there's a fire hydrant in the front yard. They say, nope, I'm not buying this house because I had a bad experience with a fire truck in my yard. I will never buy a house with a fire hydrant in the front yard again. Guess what? Including but not limited to, I can walk. So what I will tell you about line 127 is agents want to see it zero because you should really be doing these things ahead of time. Now, that being said, if your client needs this time frame to check some of these things out, by all means utilize it. But the smaller this number is, the better your offer looks. If I've got two mirrored offers of $100,000 and one has 5 days and one has zero, I'm going with the zero all day long. Even if the other one has the $500 earnest money we talked about earlier, I'm going to choose the one with zero property data, or I'm going to counter the other one that they've got to change this and I'll show you on our counter offer where we can change this. I'll just make a note of line 127. So again, I like this to be, the smaller this number is, the better it's going to be, better your offer looks. Because again, it is truly including but not limited to, they can get out for any reason. And they can utilize this form if they need to do it. And if they don't do anything within this time period, then they've essentially waived this particular section. Inspection reports, buyer may at buyer's expense obtain inspection reports to the condition of the property, including but not limited to all of these things. So they can inspect anything on that property that they want to. Because I've had somebody recently ask me, can we do an inspection? And I can't even remember what it was. On the barn, out on the somewhere. I'm like, your buyer has the right to inspect anything on that property that they want. Because again, the magic words, including but not limited to. Now, please note at 140, the cost and availability of insurance should be ascertained during the inspection period as well. And if there needs to be flood insurance, that needs to be figured out at the same time. So you need to be, your buyer's going to be all frazzled because this is all, a lot of times it's a new experience for them. And they don't know when the inspection is going to be done, and they don't know what they should be doing. Make sure you tell them, call your insurance agent, because they need to send somebody out there to make sure that they can put insurance on the property. Because if not, if we pass our inspection time period, guess what? That's on you. We're out at that point. All right, inspection notice. The buyer must furnish a complete copy of the relevant written inspection reports along with a written list of any unacceptable conditions on this form, the inspection notice, which I will show you. It is 10 days by default. I would encourage you to make this 15, just to make sure you've got time for the inspectors to get there, get the report back, and you have time to review that report with your clients, okay? I'm seeing more and more, and I tell you what I'm seeing also is I'm seeing this time period on title moving out a little bit too, because they have been pretty timely, but you might call the title company and say, hey, can you guys get this turned in 10 days, or should I extend our title period? Because I have had some calls lately where they're not getting it done, and we've had to do an amendment to extend this particular time period. So we've got 10 days by default to get the property inspected. Again, I would encourage you to make it at least 15, if not maybe 20. And by signing this contract, everyone is agreeing to the buyer having the ability to bring a specialist in as needed. So we have a general inspector that comes in and says there's quite a bit of granular loss and maybe some hail damage on the roof. Suggest you bring in a qualified roofing inspector to check this out. Now, there is a magical form that you can use, MSC 2047N, Notice of Additional Time for Specialist Report. That is best practice to utilize that form. I will tell you that the broker in front of you usually just sends an email to the other agent saying, we're exercising our additional 5 days for a specialist report. All I have to do is put them on notice, and that's sufficient. Now, if you send me either the official notice or an email stating that you are going to exercise your additional 5 days for a specialist report, and you send me your inspection notice, I'm going to expect to see a specialist report, period. This is not an extra 5 days, oh, we didn't get a chance to meet, so I'm just going to use that as a specialist time period so we can still get our inspection notice in. That's not what it's built for. It's built to actually get other people to the property. I think 5 days is probably plenty because honestly, if you are in a situation where you need to have a roofing inspector or something like that come out, I would just call the seller's agent. It's like, hey, the inspector can't be out till next Tuesday. Let's extend our inspection notice time period. Bang, and you're done, okay? Because buyer may submit only one inspection notice. It must include all matters unacceptable to the buyer and a copy of all relevant inspection and specialist reports. Buyer may not object to anything that is not in an inspection or specialist report. So, and if they don't provide a document within this time period, they are deemed to take the property as is. So you need to be real mindful of this time period too, because if we've got that inspector that happens to be behind or had to shut down for a week or whatever, and we're getting the report back on the morning of the 15th day, I might make a call and say, hey, we need to extend our inspection notice period because I don't want to be in default. Because as of tomorrow or midnight tonight, my buyer's essentially saying we'll take the property as is if I have not submitted an inspection notice. So be mindful of that time period because I've had to clean one of those up in the past week as well. Yep, what do you got?
I'm sorry, I asked the word.
Nope.
I have a question. How to fix things. Okay, so.
I would be abundantly clear that I am happy to provide you with the report, but this is not our inspection notice. Correct.
Can have an idea of what.
Correct. And, but technically it belongs to your buyer until they provide it to the seller. But if they're okay with that.
Any issue with that? Causing any?
I don't think so, because when we make a notice, we're gonna send it to them anyway. So they're gonna ultimately see it at the end, and as long as it's clear that, hey, if you guys wanna look at this, if there's anything that you wanna start taking care of or fix, I'm not gonna tell you what I mean, I can kind of give you an inkling of what my client's gonna want, but this is not our official notice. I'm just providing this to you. So yeah, I think that's fine.
Hard to get.
That's right.
Closing this, that, and that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, everyone's fighting that battle. Yeah, you just can't, everybody's 2 weeks out. Absolutely, and I think that's a good one.
Takes like 2 or 3 days.
The effective date of your contract is the date that everyone has signed.
Okay.
So until I've got signatures on both sides, it's not, I don't have a valid contract.
Okay. The issue that I'm currently dealing with.
Okay.
I need to go back in and look.
Hmm?
And they knew that.
Yeah, because that's how the time frame works. So if you get a contract today, the 14th, day one is tomorrow, the 15th. It does not begin at whatever time. So if I get a contract right now, it doesn't begin at noon. It begins at midnight tonight. Tomorrow's day one.
But my,
So if you got it on the 30th, today is the 15th day, because 31
okay,
plus 14,
the inspection. Figure out what she wants to do, or if she wants to. I've never done this before. This is my first.
well, okay, hold that thought for a second, because I'm almost there.
Okay.
So we've got, again, we've got this inspection notice, and if we don't do anything, then we essentially take it as is. All right, so look at lines 155 and up. I just ignore everything below that. Pretend it's just blank at the bottom. Once I've done an inspection, my buyer's got 3 options. To say I'm satisfied with the inspection, to say there are things that I'm not satisfied with and I want you to fix, or just to say, you know what, I'm not satisfied and I'm walking away. So from 155 up, that's what the contract says. It's gonna really mess with me because this box at 157 used to be at 154, so. But if you check this box right here, you have effectively erased line 3. Your buyer cannot unilaterally terminate the contract without giving the seller an opportunity to fix the items that are wrong, okay? And this is much like this property data day. This is one of the things that agents look at to know if their seller is going to get an opportunity to try to rectify whatever the situation is. Because if this box is not checked, and we've got the example of an inspector, is 10 days out, and I get the inspection on the 15th day, and I decide at midnight or 11:59 on the 15th day that we're going to walk, well, that seller's now lost 15 days of marketing time and their own time, et cetera. So most agents want to see this box checked. So same example, I got 2 side-by-side $100,000 offers. One has it checked, one doesn't. I'm leaning towards the one that's checked because at least my seller has an opportunity to fix things and keep this buyer hooked in so the property will actually close. So let's assume this box is checked. I have gotten my report. I've gone through it with my client. Perhaps I've gotten a specialist report, and we have prepared our inspection notice and sent it to the seller. We're catching up with your question right now. The seller and I now have 10 days to get on the same page during the resolution period. So during that period, we're going to bounce back and forth. I send you a list of 15 items that my buyer wants fixed. You come back and say, we'll fix 7 of them. I come back and say, well, we really need these other 2 on it. And it just bounces back and forth in that resolution period until we reach an agreement. Now, at any point during that, the seller can wave his hand and say, you know what? I'll fix everything that was in your original report. That's fine. I'm tired of all this back and forth. We'll fix everything on the initial request. And it moves forward. Or at any point, your buyer can wave their arms like, you know what? Forget it. We'll take it as it is. We'll take it with no repairs. So at any point that can happen. But during this resolution period, we got to figure out who's going to complete and pay for the correction and or if there's going to be a monetary adjustment. So don't be afraid in your inspection notice. If you know you want ABC Roofing to fix the roof because they came and brought you a bid, say roof to be replaced by ABC Roofing per attached bid. That's fine. If that's the way it is, then as long as your insurance company, as long as it's covered, I don't care. But if you don't have somebody to use, this is who my buyer wants, based on this bid. I lost my train of thought. I was going somewhere else. Nope, I was going somewhere else with that. Just gonna fix it. Monetary adjustment. It'll come back to me in a second. And again, as I said, at any point, the seller can say, I'm gonna do everything, or the buyer's gonna accept it without anything being done. Please note, though, if we do a monetary adjustment, so we've asked for 15 things, the seller's come back and said, we don't wanna fix anything, but we'll give you $3,000 instead. Make sure that's not gonna mess with your buyer's loan. Just call the lender and say, okay, seller's gonna give us $3,000 for repairs. How do you want it to appear in the contract? And write it however they want it, because it's never the same. You can call the same lender back in 2 weeks, and they're gonna want it a different way. So just make sure that you know how they want that done. If the career in unacceptable condition, yeah, I've lost whatever it was. It'll come back to me though. And if you guys, if we don't reach this agreement within 10 days, then the contract effectively dies. So if we're at that 10th day, it's never a bad idea just to do a contract amendment that says resolution period extended to X. Okay? Just so we've still got that showing that we're under contract, because once we're out of that, at any point, either party can say, you know what, we're out of contract, I'm done. And trust me, I've had those calls recently too, where an agent's like, well, what do we do? I'm like, well, you were out of contract. There's nothing we can do. You didn't extend this time period. Section F, you just get to ignore this section altogether. Just get to skip it. Don't even worry about it. Wasn't that fun? All right, broker rule. I'm going to do everything I can to represent you as best I can. You're not going to rely on me to select or engage any particular company. If you want me to call ABC Roofing and tell them what day to come out, I'm happy to do that for you. I am not going to force you to use ABC Roofing. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you multiple options to go look at who's going to do your roof for you. But I'm not going to pick it for you. And if you do anything else, I'm going to help you find those people, but I'm not going to, kind of like the legal advice. I'm not going to provide any legal advice, and I'm also not going to do anything that is somebody else's job. But I will help you find those people. Now, provided, we'll use the ABC Roofing as an example. So buyer moves into the house, and the roof is constantly leaking. We are held harmless with that, provided, number one, we didn't employ that person. We didn't say that you've got to use ABC Roofing, because if we told the buyer that they got to use ABC Roofing and then there's a problem, we are now liable. Two, if I tell them that ABC Roofing, that there won't be any problems, and there is a problem, then I'm liable. If I engage ABC Roofing for them and tell them who they've got to use, I've got a problem. If I know, I'm not going to use ABC Roofing in this particular instance. So if I know that there is something that is not right about the property. I have listed this property in the past, and I know in that basement wall, there's a giant crack in the foundation. But the most recent occupant has built a gorgeous bookcase right in front of that. I have knowledge that there's a giant crack in that foundation. Buyer buys the house, that crack in that foundation becomes a giant issue. It's found out that I knew about it, now I'm liable. So disclose, disclose, disclose. If you guys know anything, just tell it, share it. It's better off for you. So as long as we don't do those three things, I don't make the statement, the person that did it wasn't employed by me, and I didn't know better and not tell you, then you can't hold me harmful if that wall caves in or if that roof collapses or whatever, because I didn't force you to use those people. Okay? Home warranty. Either the seller's not giving one, the buyer wants one, or the seller already has one in place. And I will show you in a minute where I normally just attach this to the contract as well. I usually fill out the home warranty and send it with it rather than just asking for something, a random one. I will fill out the information and send it to them. All right, disposition of earnest money. This paragraph is why I don't like earnest money, because it talks about, and I'm not going to bore you guys, it talks about what happens with the earnest money when there's a dispute. Title company has the right to release it. It's got to sit for 365 days. It goes into arbitration. It's just a whole ugly mess. So if we have a problem with earnest money, this is how we deal with it. Loss and condemnation, same thing. I'm not going to bore you with all the attorney lingo in here. But if there's a fire in the kitchen and we're supposed to close next week, the buyer has several options. One, we can just terminate the contract because the property's no longer in the condition that it was when they originally made their offer. Two, they can wait for the seller to fix the property and put it back into its original condition and then close. Three, the buyer can take the insurance proceeds and fix it themselves. Or four, we can just discount the property and buy it at a lower rate. So there are options that your buyer has in the event there is a catastrophic event at the property. Hopefully, we don't have to run into that, but last spring, I ran into this quite a bit. We had in May, we had a giant hailstorm on the south side of town. And we had several people that were closing properties that week, the week after, the next week. Well, they had a loss, so we had to postpone a lot of those closings in time enough to get the insurance company out there to determine what they were going to do, and then negotiated whether that was going to be escrowed, whether it was going to be prepaid. That happens afterwards, but we had to figure out what we're going to do about that before we close the property. And don't close the property until you know what the situation is. Because once your buyer signs off on that contract at the title company, it's going to be really hard to get that insurance money or money out of that seller to fix whatever that item is. So make sure those things are in place beforehand. Adjustments, closing costs, we talked about this already. These are the things that your buyer's going to be responsible for. These are the things the seller's responsible for. And these are the things that we're going to split. And please note in seller concessions down here, where is it? They've moved it on me too. Title commitment, owner's policy, and title fees paid by buyer. Okay, so the closing costs will cover all those things up here, but will not include the cost of a home warranty. So I talked about if we had a $2,500 closing cost that we'd ask for, the $500 warranty is on top of that. Any title fees paid by the seller. So the seller's fees here, as I mentioned earlier, are not part of those concessions. These fees are over and above, as well as any transaction fees charged to the buyer by the broker. And that would be the flat fee. So if you're charging that $150 or $250, that cannot come from the seller. That has to come from your buyer. Okay? 1031 exchange, everyone is agreeing to participate in a 1031 exchange should the seller want to do that. It's not a big deal. It's a couple extra pieces of paper. It's no sweat for your buyer. So we're just agreeing that we're already going to do that. This contract and any rider attached becomes the entire agreement. Again, as I said, if it's not in the four corners of this contract, when it is signed, it does not exist. So, and nobody can change, modify, or amend this except in writing signed by all parties. All right, default and remedies. Hopefully we don't get to this situation, but unfortunately you probably will at some point. We've got a buyer and a seller, everybody's agreed, we've got inspections done, and we're supposed to close tomorrow. Seller gets a call today that their job in Tulsa just got eliminated, that they're not gonna move after all. And they decide today, you know what? We're just not gonna move. We're not gonna sell. Sorry about your buyers, but we're out. Buyers got three options at that point. One, they can sue for performance to say, we're buying this house and we're gonna sue you to let us buy this house from you. Two, they could send them a mutual release and release their earnest money and say, you know what, fine, we'll go back to our position, you go back to your position. And it says in here, or at line 319, but to me, this should say and or. Pursue any other remedy of damages allowed by law. Because we're a litigious society, and let's face it, if somebody wants to sue you, even if you've gotten a mutual release, they're gonna do it anyway. So specifically enforce the contract or mutually release them. If we mutually release them, the buyer's entitled to their earnest money back and any expenses that they have incurred. So if your buyer has spent money at title, if your buyer has had to pay to get the septic uncovered, whatever your inspection costs that your buyer has had, whatever appraisal costs your buyer has had, are all now the responsibility of the seller. So back to our example of the $500 lien from the city, it's gonna be a lot cheaper for the seller to pay that $500 than it is for them to default on the contract and have to repay all of these expenses that the buyer has had. So that's an easy conversation usually to have a lot of the time is, it's gonna cost you more money if you don't pay this off. If the buyer defaults, the seller has essentially the same remedies. They can sue for performance, they can mutually release them, and or they can sue them. If they mutually release them, the seller is only entitled to the earnest money. They don't get any of their other expenses back because it's deemed that those expenses will later be utilized in the future sale of the home. That they've already done a title search, so we already know the title's clean. So when you sell it in 3 months, we already know the title works good. So that will save some of that money. So it's assumed that they've already gotten their benefit from that. So seller defaults, buyer gets everything back that they've spent. Buyer defaults, seller gets the earnest money. Again, hopefully we won't get to that point, but at some point you will probably cross that bridge. If we are crossing that bridge, whoever wins, the other people are going to pay for their attorney fees as well, and have already agreed to that as part of this contract. Seller disclosure statement. Either we got it, we want it, or the seller's not providing it. I encourage you pretty sternly to get seller's disclosures before you make an offer. It's in your buyer's best interest. Even if it's just the mandatory 4, that's all they filled out, that's fine. I would rather see that than see nothing. So if we got a listing that popped up this morning and you want to go show your client at 1 o'clock and they don't have the disclosures on yet because they're not going to get fined till later, they're going to do that tonight, call the agent like, hey, can you email me those disclosures real quick? Because we're going to go show it at 1. Oh, there's some on the kitchen counter. Great, perfect. We'll look at them there, whatever that is. But try to look at them before you make the offer, if at all possible. And if not, then I don't mind this default that you've got 1 day to get it to me and I got 3 days to review it. But I don't necessarily love this because to me, this is another kind of get out of jail free card for the buyer, that if I don't like what's in the seller's disclosure statement, essentially I can walk because of this particular paragraph. So I would rather you get it before you make your offer, if at all possible. And the seller's confirming that everything in that disclosure is accurate to the best of their knowledge and that they're going to disclose anything else that comes out of that between now and the time of closing. So if between now and the time of closing, a giant crack develops in that wall, then the seller needs to disclose that to us in writing, okay? Lead-based paint, if it's before 78, we will attach a lead-based paint writer. Walkthrough and verification of condition. Your client has the right for a walkthrough to verify that the property is in the condition it's supposed to be and make sure that the repairs that we requested were actually completed. I encourage you to try to get the repairs, if you're going to re-inspect those, get those done as soon as possible. Don't wait till 2 days before closing or the day of closing to verify those things are done. Because if you walk in and find out that the GFI plugs were not put in the kitchen an hour before closing, guess what? It's not going to happen. And if that's a big deal to your client, now we're going to have to delay closing until that's done. And GFIs is a bad example, but whatever that is, if it's not completed and your buyer's not going to close, I would rather have known that last week than find it out the morning of. Your buyer's also got the ability, if the property is vacant, to have the utilities transferred into their name up to 4 days ahead of closing. I think this is a silly sentence to have in here because to me, the buyer and the seller are going to agree to that anyway, whatever the situation is. But seller doesn't have to offer it and buyer doesn't have to accept it, but they have that ability. And personally, when I've got clients that don't want to do a walkthrough, I go do it for them. I walk through the morning of just to make sure everything is as it's supposed to be. Because having dealt with foreclosures, I can tell you sometimes you walk in and guess what? The toilet that was there yesterday is not there today. So I encourage you to do a walkthrough. If they're, like I said, if they're not going to go do it for them. Signatures, this Missouri Electronics Act that we talk about over and over again. Governing law, I'm not going to break the law. If you choose to have me break the law, well, I'm not going to do that. So if there's anything like that, we are not, I can't do that because I just can't. We're not going to. Notices. The easiest way to describe this paragraph is notice to the agent is notice to the client. If I send you a contract, I should have the basic expectation that it is just as if I sent that contract directly to your client. And you should have the same expectation of me when you send me a document that I am timely forwarding that document to my client. So if you get that agent that says, well, we got your offer yesterday, but we're going to look at them all tomorrow night at 5. Okay. Number one, that's your seller's option to do that. But you need to let me know that because I am operating under the precipice of Section 20 that says you're going to present my offer in a timely fashion as soon as you get it. And yes, that is frustrating when they do that, but some of them are. Or waiting till after the open house on Sunday or whatever that is. But and that's the thing is they should absolutely tell you up front if they're waiting to go with their client. And that's honestly, I usually follow up my offers with a call. Hey, when do you think you're going to have a chance to review this? Well, we're going to wait till 5. Well, you didn't tell me that. I'm expecting you to go ahead and present this today. I usually don't give them an option. If they haven't told me that ahead of time. Yeah. Well, still, I like to tell them that you're not doing your job right. So So make sure that you're doing it in a timely fashion. Here is where if I'm doing a home warranty, I'm gonna actually just attach that home warranty rider on here. If we've got any contingencies for the sale or closing of the buyer's property, we can add those here, financing addendum as well. Any special agreements, which, it's buyer to have backyard fenced before closing. Whatever that may be, if you got something that doesn't in here, then you can put it in your special agreements. Are you a party to this transaction? Do you have ownership in it, or are you showing an immediate family member? Immediate family members are spouses, children, siblings, and parents. Yes. So I personally disclose aunts and uncles and cousins because I don't see a reason not to. But those four are the ones that you've got to. Compensation. Typically, all the commission will be coming from the seller. Now, if you are getting a flat fee of 150 or 250 bucks, we just talked about that you cannot get that from the seller. So you are actually receiving compensation from both sides of the transaction if that's the case. Or if the seller's only offering 2.5% and your buyer's going to make up that other 0.5%, now you are getting compensation from both sides. So most often, if you're not doing a transaction fee, it's just going to be seller. Brokerage relationship, you guys are going to be a seller's limited agent and a designated agent, and or a buyer's limited agent and designated agent. Brokerage firm assisting the buyer, our license number, your information and date. Franchise disclosure, if we're part of a franchise, you can't sue anybody but us. We are going to provide all of this information to the MLS and Board of Realtors unless you tell us not to. We are going to make sure that we are abiding by the Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act. So if you are a foreign person, we cannot sell that to you, but title companies should catch that, and they should know if they are or not. Don't sell to terrorists. Just try to avoid it. It's just not good, so just avoid that. Acceptance date and the deadline date. You don't have to put an expiration for your contract to be valid. You can leave this blank and send it, and it's still completely valid. If I'm putting an expiration, I try not to have one that's much less than 24 hours. So if I showed a property tonight, I would probably put 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon or 7 o'clock tomorrow. If it's going to be much less than 24 hours, I call the agent and tell them why. Hey, this client's in from out of town. We're looking at properties today and today only. So if you guys can't let us know by 6, for sure, we're going to go look at this other property and make an offer on it. But we've got to have something in writing today. So I let them know why I'm in such a sense of urgency. But you don't have to have it in there. And if you make an offer to me and don't have a deadline on there, and I'm just, we haven't responded, and your client finds something else, just call me and tell me that, the contract dated whatever has been terminated or withdrawn. Okay? Acceleration clause, you can put that here in the special agreements as well. I don't particularly like putting them in the contract because then I'm already saying, I've offered you 100, but I'll pay you 110, so why not? So I prefer not to put them in there if I don't have to, because I think it kind of shows my hand. Now, I am willing to call the agent or email the agent and say, let me know, please don't just kick us out. Give us an opportunity for highest and best if you have more than one offer. But yeah, I prefer to, because to me, that's kind of like the financing. That's terms that my buyer has given me information about that I don't know that I want to go waving out there to everybody. Because if I put it out front, then it kind of gives the seller the opportunity to say, well, but again, they've got to get an offer that's above mine. So there is that piece as well. But at the same rate, I could call you and say, hey, why don't you send me an offer for 210? It's a thing, and the one thing I don't like, well, many things I don't like, but one of the things I don't like about the escalation is, okay, that's great. We're going to pay $1,000 more than the highest bid up to 250. We made an offer of 220. We're going to pay $1,000 more over the highest bid, et cetera, et cetera. So we finally reach the end, and we get a contract at 237. Well, now the house appraised at 225. Made an offer of 220. Still got to bring it. That's right. So now we're 12 grand off. So either we have to come to a meeting of the minds on that appraisal time period, which the seller's probably not going to do at this point, or your buyer's got to come up with that difference. So that's what scares me about the escalation is you got to make sure you've got the cash to pull that off. And lenders really don't like that either because then they're saying, well, we don't know what we're able to loan or what we're not. So But yes, they are in there. I've seen them as well. If you got additional signatures, you can check this box. And it says here, a day is defined as a 24-hour calendar day, 7 days a week. So holidays count. Keep that in mind. So just because we're got a quote holiday next Monday, it still counts in your real estate time periods. So this buyer's going to sign off on the information right here. And if the seller accepts it, they will sign here. So if they do, that becomes my effective date. I've got signatures on both sides. If the seller rejects or counters, then they'll initial down here and we'll move on. I don't know what these 2 blanks down here are left open. That's for the signature. I don't know why they left them there. That's so strange. They just redlined that whole thing, which is good. And another thing, since it doesn't have in here, they took out, there used to be an earnest money receipt here for you guys when you got the earnest money. Now I would encourage you just to use the earnest money, I can't even remember what it's called. It may even be called earnest money receipt. You make a photocopy of the check on a piece of paper, take the check and that piece of paper to the title company rep will sign off on that as a receipt, and then it's out of your hands, which is where I want it. I don't want you guys carrying around earnest money because don't let it get lost. That's not good. Okay, questions on the contract? All right. These are really nice and self-explanatory. I kind of like it because we've made our offer. Well, now the seller's going to respond, so we'll check seller. This would be counter offer 1, and they're going to respond with whatever their terms are. Street address, zip county, buyer seller name. If they're just changing the purchase price or concessions or earnest money, they can do it on any one of these lines. Now, we talked about the property data period of 5 days, that if I got that, I would probably counter that particular thing. And I would say section 7, line, whatever it is, 156, changed to 0. Okay? Or whatever it may be. Or if there's other terms, you've got this room down here. Deadline date on this. Usually on a counter offer, I do put deadlines because at that point I've got their attention and I want to make sure that we're bouncing this back and forth quickly. Because if it's not going to work, you may as well move on with another offer and my buyer may as well move on looking for something else. So I do put time frames on my counter offers. So whoever's making it will sign here. And then the same thing here. If it's accepted, then the other party would sign here and that would become our effective date. Or they can either reject this offer and the deal dies, or they can make a new counter offer. And in this case, would be counter offer number 2. And they just bounce back and forth until we get on the same page. Okay? Nope, you're fine.
What is the norm?
I do, just because I think it's,
It shows you.
I don't think it's weird. And the other thing is a lot of times, I may not know what their broker license number is. So, but you can find all that in the, yeah. So normally I do. I don't see any reason not to. Well, truthfully, you don't have to.
I did all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Fill that out.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and that's the truth. You do not have to, but I do. All right. I think
I just got that inspection report.
inspection notices bounced out, so I got to bring them back in. Yep, we've had the experiences, you bet. All right, so we've got our inspection back, and we're going to come in here, and we're going to make our requests of what we want to have fixed. So we can either say, hey, we're completely satisfied with the inspection, it's great, we're going to take it just as it sits, or we want these items fixed. Now, they've changed this form. We used to have a really nice big block here that we could put all kinds of things in there. Now you kind of got a smaller area. So let's assume that you've got one of those inspections that you're going to ask for 20 items that need to be repaired. See, oops, forgot my caps was wrong. See attached exhibit A. And then just make a Word document titled Exhibit A and just attach it to it and have everybody sign it. And you can do that for anything. So on like the first page of the contract, inclusions and exclusions, if there were, you know, if it was a farm and you wanted to make sure that the horse and the cattle and all of these things were included, you can just make a property list and attach it as Exhibit A. So you can attach exhibits at any point, just make sure that you cite them very specifically, so I know when I'm flipping through the contract, what Exhibit A actually is, okay? Or the buyer's just gonna terminate. And again, if we have checked the box at 157, it effectively erases this ability to do this, okay? That's only if we've not checked that limitation of inspection rights. If we've checked that box, we cannot do 3. Then the buyer makes their offer, and then the seller's got their opportunity to respond. Either I'll fix everything that you've got listed above, I'm not gonna fix any of the items above, so the contract dies, or I'm not gonna fix all the things you asked for, but I will make you a counter proposal. And the counter proposal looks like this. And notice this is much like the counter offers. This starts bouncing back and forth with whomever brought it. So in this particular case, it would be to the buyer from the seller because it's their response. And part A, seller hereby responds as follows with whatever. And if you need to do, if I've sent you Exhibit A and you need to respond, you can make it Exhibit B and send that, okay? You can attach as many of those as you need to if you can't make the stuff fit in the lengths. Or, what do you do with the money part? There used to be a blank right here that said, or offers X amount of money. So I guess you have to put that up in here at this point now. So if the seller wants to offer money, it needs to be here. It used to be, like I said, a separate blank. And note too, please, that if they do get that money, we talked about that, make sure you talk to the lender. And then whoever's received this can either accept it, they do not accept it, and they want to counter propose it, bang, or they do not accept it and don't make a counter proposal and the deal dies. Or, remember us throwing our hands up in the air, that's what this Section C is. Section C says, okay, the seller's like, all right, I'll just fix everything on your initial report. Or the buyer says, okay, we'll take the property without any repairs. That's what Section C is for. You probably won't utilize that a whole lot, but that's what it's there for. Okay? Questions on inspections, notices? Okay.
So when you're,
I can't tell you how many calls I've had of people doing that,
okay, because it's,
because here's how I feel. And I think your buyer has the right to inspect anything on that property that they want. It is not my seller's responsibility to bring an electrician in and figure out what needs to be fixed. That's not my job. That's the buyer's job. Now, also it said, and this is what I tell people to respond with is, no reason for me to look it up when I could show you guys here, is that line.
what I'm saying is,
If the window repair has already been in the inspection
yes,
notice,
but we couldn't get.
then I don't have a problem with it. If it said, seller to replace windows once bid comes in or whatever, that's fine. But if I ask for 15 items on the first inspection notice, I can't add 5 new ones in my response. I can only cite those initial 15 and bounce back and forth. So make sure you ask for everything in your initial one. But if I get that where somebody just tries to send me, something after the fact because whatever reason, I just say, well, I just need you to go read line 148. You had one chance to send me your report with everything that you wanted fixed on it. If we needed to extend the time period for you to get those inspections completed, that should have happened, but we didn't. So you submitted one report and I'm going off these initial 15 items. Okay? Buyer and seller have 10 days to get on the same page. Buyer has submitted inspection notice today. So as of tomorrow, day 1, we've got 10 days for the buyer and the seller to get on the same page. So hopefully the seller responds in a timely fashion, because I've had that too, where the seller responds on noon of the 10th day and the buyer's not going to get what they want. So we've got to extend that time period. But I don't really have a problem. Yeah.
Sellers couldn't.
Well, and everybody's on the same page already, so I don't have a problem with that. It's the 5 additional items that they're asking for now because I've refused to fix all 15 of their initial things and they're mad, so they're gonna add these things in here. You can't do that.
Because then I felt awkward.
Yep. All right, what questions you guys got? I think that's, and did I show you the COVID writers last time? I did, didn't I? We'll go over them real quick here. Yep, that's just the sign for the door, which is great. There is one in here if you guys are having open houses or whatever and want just a basic boilerplate sign. There's one in there that's just called the COVID-19 flyer. Writer and amendment. All right, this is if we're having an issue. So we've got a property under contract and I've only had one instance where this writer has been used in the last however many months we've been dealing with this. Because it states very specifically that we're going to utilize this if and when we lose essential services to include title search, appraisal, permitting, inspections, et cetera, et cetera. So far, we have not had an issue where we have not had access to our essential services. Title's been open. Maybe you got to do work from the parking lot, but title's been open. The lenders have been open. The appraisers have been working. The inspectors have been working. So we've had access to everything that we've needed. Let's suppose that our title company has to close down because they're under quarantine. Well, we can come in here and we can use this writer because of this, and we can extend the closing date. We can say that, we're going to, we can't perform right now due to COVID, and we're going to close this. If it's 30 days or more, then we can wait that long. And if it doesn't occur within that time period, then we're all going to go back to our initial starting point because of COVID. So again, I don't want to beat this too long because I've had one instance in 10 months where we've had to utilize this, and that's because the buyer contracted and was under quarantine for 14 days. So we had to extend the closing because of a COVID-related issue. But truthfully, we've yet to have a situation where essential services have not been available to us. This is the one that I really encourage you guys to do with all of your clients on both sides of the table. It's a very generic whatever, but essentially it says, hey, Mr. Buyer or Mr. Seller, we're in the era of COVID and you are aware of that. You are aware of the risks that you are taking by entering houses and or the risks that you were taking having people come in your house, and we're just getting on the same page here. You know what's going on, I know what's going on, and you're going to sign this document to say that. Keller Williams goes here and just their signature. So again, it's just putting everybody on the same page and on notice, which I think is a good thing to do. Sure, I'm not missing anything else for your buyers here. Seller measurement disclosure. I don't remember if I showed you that on the other day, guys. This would come from the seller on a listing. They're going to indicate the property address and where they got their actual measurements from. And as I told you guys before, I don't really want you doing your own measurements. I'd rather you get it from one of these 3 places, because then if it's wrong, it's on them and it's not on you. And then whoever's going to, both sides are going to sign off on this. So your buyer would sign this document whenever you get this from the seller. And usually a lot of people are just putting this on their disclosure page with their seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint. So it's there. Show you guys this. Some of the MAR forms still have this reference block at the top. Most of them are gone. I really thought they would get rid of this one this year, but it's still here. You don't have to put anything in there if you don't want to. If you do, you can just use the property address, but at the bottom of this one, you're going to write the property address again. This should be prepared by the seller. The seller would have checked one of these 2 here, and then this is where your purchaser acknowledges what's going on, that they received a copy of all the information above. And I've had this question before. We didn't receive anything. Well, you got everything that was listed above, which was nothing. So you still received a copy of everything that there was. And that you reviewed this pamphlet, and either you want your 10-day opportunity for a lead-based paint or you waive it. Most of them are going to waive it. I actually prefer, even though this shows an X, I actually prefer you guys to get an initial in that box, because I would like them to initial off on the fact that they waived their right. So if something comes up, it was very clear, because there's nothing here on E for them to acknowledge, and I don't necessarily like that. Yep. And this should be, this is the seller's listing agent's responsibility to put the seller on notice. Seller will sign here, purchaser, property address, and then agent's information. I think that's what I got for you today, guys.
Cover the down deposit.
Anybody got any questions about what we did today? Sorry, I'm gonna stop this sharing here, or stop this recording right now, and we'll figure this out. Hi, Susie, do you have any questions?
Nope, not right now.
All right, well, if you need anything, give me a call. I don't know if you're in my phone or not. 417-827-6275. 417-827-6275. Just text me your name to make sure you're in my phone.
Okay,
Good. Have a great day. Thanks.
thank you.